I'm going to introduce myself to those who do not know me. I'm a Brazilian artist that lives in Italy. I was a resident here at RU in 2018. And the building was totally covered like a crystal artwork. And now I can see the building. It's so beautiful. It was a big surprise for me the first time I came here this time. And I want to thank Natalie for her ideas and generosity. The reason that I'm doing this research now is thanks to her. And I want also to thank my wonderful galleries that always support me since 2019. Isabella Hutchinson. I had my last solo exhibition at the gallery last November, and it was about this work that we are going to see. And I want to thank also Lucas Mertehikian. I couldn't imagine, I couldn't have a better mentor, and it's really fantastic to collaborate with him to do this research and new works together. So my background is engineering, and I have an MBA. At a certain point, I decided to quit everything to become an artist. And my work focuses also on the impacts of technology and media in society, culture, and communication. And nature has always been part of my work, but it is since 2022 that it became my central focus. So I'd like to introduce Lucas Mertehikian. He is the director of the Humanities Institute at the New York Botanical Garden and visiting assistant professor at Pratt Institute, where he teaches graduate seminars on plants and culture. We have been working together over the past few weeks, and we are currently conducting research on plant humanities for future artworks and exhibitions.
Thank you, Debora. Well, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to work with you these past few weeks. I also want to thank Isabella for connecting us. I was thrilled when I saw Herbaria at Hutchinson Modern earlier this year. It really blew me away. And I want to thank Natalie for inviting me to be a part of this process, and all of you for being here to listen to this presentation. The reason why I'm here is because Debora's work resonated a lot with some of the research that I had been involved with over the past few years. I'm going to talk about that in detail later. But as hopefully you will see through this presentation, Debora's work really speaks to many of the themes that plant people, both humanists and scientists, are thinking about in our current climate predicament. So I would like to start with a story that some of you might know. In May 2017, a piece of shocking news, as you can see on the slide, made its way into the science sections of newspapers around the world. It certainly caused a stir in the botanical community, but barely rippled beyond it. In Brisbane, Australia, biosecurity officials destroyed 150 plant specimens that had been sent on loan from the Museum of Natural History in Paris to the Queensland Herbarium. A researcher had requested them there to study the genus Olearia, a relative of daisies that is in danger because of urbanization and habitat loss in Australia. As you can see, the headlines were pretty dramatic. The New York Times called it an irreplaceable plant specimen as an obscene loss after being incinerated in quarantine flood. On the left, The Guardian ran Australian biosecurity officials destroyed plant samples from 19th century France. But this second report, the one from The Guardian, already contained a fundamental inaccuracy that I think speaks to the moral of this story. The plants were not from the 19th century. They were from the 18th century, and they had been collected by Jacques-Julien Autou de Labardière, an ambitious French botanist and one of the first Europeans to survey Australian coastline when he circumnavigated the world. And although the plants had been stored in France for more than 200 years, they were not French, as claimed by The Guardian. They were Australian. They were native to the very land where they were ultimately destroyed. These plants had survived centuries in the herbarium, including 2 world wars, the French Revolution, and yet, in the end, they were lost to negligence and bureaucracy. Their final demise, in a way, was a sort of failed homecoming. Botanists have relied on herbarium specimens since the 16th century to classify and study plant life. Dried specimens became an alternative to lived gardens in the Renaissance, which were too fragile and too unpredictable. And as I'm sure you all know from our personal experiences, plants can grow too fast, too slow, or not at all. And this became a real problem to share knowledge across distances. And that's why naturalists needed a new way of preserving them. The result was this. And as you can see on the screen, the specimens that were destroyed, these are some of them, they show that there's a cost to preserve plants for posterity. Dried plants tend to lose their color, their smell, their volume. They're flattened. In a way, the price that they pay to be studied and remembered is life itself. And that's why in Latin, in the early modern period, herbaria were also called hortusicus, dried gardens, or hortus iemalis, winter gardens. These are gardens that don't change. I don't know if any of you have ever been in an herbarium, but walking into an herbarium is like stepping into a space that is really somewhere in between life and death. And these are actually the cases that were left empty after the 150 specimens were destroyed. So now we have that void in the Natural Museum in Paris. You can experience this paradox, the paradox of being somewhere in between the movement of life and the stillness of death. If you go, for example, to the New York Botanical Garden, where the herbarium in the Bronx holds over 7 million specimens collected throughout the last 3 centuries across the world. So why were these old plants burned? Why do we have that hole in the record now? Australian biosecurity officers claimed that the paperwork was incomplete. Then they alleged that the declared value of the specimens was only $2. So there was no insurance risk in burning them. The director of the Museum of Natural History in Paris was stunned, and a few months later, in an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald, he asked, and I quote, "If the Mona Lisa were sent, would you burn it?" The answer is obvious, though. You wouldn't, of course, no matter what the paperwork says, no matter what the insurance says. So again, why were these plants burned? In 1999, 2 American biologists, James Wondersee and Elizabeth Schussler, conducted a large survey in schools across the US to understand children's perceptions and attitudes towards plants. The results were somewhat alarming. Only 7%, as you can see on the slide, expressed any interest in the plant world, and 2/3 of those were girls. Most children couldn't even identify common plants in their neighborhoods or houses. And this seems extreme, but it actually reflects a trait that many of us might inadvertently carry. We can wonder now, how many trees did we see on our way here today? How many plants did we really stop and saw? So biologists call this plant awareness deficit. And it's basically a paradox. The paradox is that plants make up over 70% of the planet's biomass, and that life on Earth would be impossible without them. But yet, we treat them as background. We treat them as motionless and homogeneous, but we know that they're incredibly varied and full of life. And that's what drew me to Debora's art. When I saw her show herbaria earlier this year at Hutchinson Modern and Contemporary, I saw the work of someone whose vision casted light on everything those Australian officials failed to see. the value of preserved specimens not only as scientific data, but as carriers of cultural memory and historical narratives, their beauty, their ability to move through time and across geographies, their role in both histories of colonial violence and efforts of biological preservation. Debora's work, I think, makes a powerful case against plant awareness deficit. Plants can live without us, Debora's work tells us, and they did so for hundreds of millions of years, but we cannot live without them. And that's why, to me, her way of imagining the life of plants is so compelling.
The inspiration for plant did not come from the exuberant nature of my home country, but from the fresco of the Villa of Livia. I was involved in a project with Professor Cornelia Lauf from John Cabot University around the fresco from the Livia of Livia. And this fresco is now housed at the National Roman Museum. This fresco depicts a garden filled with plants and birds, and I found myself wondering how many of these species shown still exist today. At the same time, my background as an engineer had already led me into the world of generative art, artificial intelligence, and other digital tools. The convergence of these elements, on one hand, my curiosity about the fresco, my interest in plants, and my research into technology gave rise to Plant. Plant is an ongoing research project that uses data sets, artificial intelligence, and blockchain technology to create a symbolic archive of endangered plant species. Plants we risk losing not only scientifically, but also poetically and culturally, primarily due to human intervention in nature. How do I work with AI, and why do I use AI, artificial intelligence, in my work? I began training an artificial intelligence model using data sets built from my personal archive, which includes thousands of images of my own artworks, as well as images I have collected over the years from the colonial period of the Americas, such as Baroque churches, vases, maps, hair books, tapestries, azulejos, tiles, and many other artifacts. The idea is not to recreate history, but to activate it. In the Americas, monoculture agriculture began during the colonial period, when colonizers prioritized it over the hundreds of sustainable indigenous techniques that were already in use. This is the so-called ecological colonialism. Monocultures require vast areas of land to grow a single crop, making them more vulnerable to pests. As a result, they rely heavily on pesticides and other chemicals to survive, damaging the soil, harming the environment, and reducing the variety of what we eat. My artificial intelligence model isn't just generate visuals, it is algorithmically engaging with my archive through statistical inference. Of course, the model doesn't understand anything. It doesn't grasp the meaning of the artwork or the intention, but I train it to respond in ways that reflect my painting style and also align with the patterns of my artistic practice, experience, interests, and above all, the intent I encoded into the process. Today, it is entirely possible to produce food on a large scale using sustainable agriculture practices. Technology can support this shift, but only if we design and train algorithms according to principles of sustainability, biodiversity, and regeneration. In other words, technology reflects the values we encode into it. If you prioritize short-term profit, we get systems that exhausted the soil. If we prioritize long-term, we get systems that regenerate it. Ultimately, true sustainability is also economically viable because destroying the soil is definitely not cost-effective in the long term, and the big agrochemical industry is understanding that now. I think my work may bring attention to endangered plants and the issues surrounding them through beauty, narratives, and art, while my primary intention is always artistic. I recognize that this practice inevitably intersects with environmental and social concerns. It helps give visibility to plants, as Luca was saying, drawing attention to what is very often overlooked.
So as I said before, I think Debora's work speaks powerfully to the questions that are at the heart of the plant humanities, which is an emerging field in which I've been working for the past 5 years, first at Dumbarton Oaks, a Harvard Research Institute in Washington, D.C., and also a public garden, and in the last couple of years at the New York Botanical Garden. I should say that my background is in comparative literature and cultural history, so I really came to plants through literature and art about plants. And in the course of the last few years, I've been in fruitful conversation also with scientists and scholars from many disciplines and artists like Debora. So what is plant humanities? Plant humanities is a term, is a rather new term that is used to designate the interdisciplinary study of plants and how they shape the environment, including, of course, human culture. We begin with a paradox. Plants are rooted, but they move across oceans, countries, and disciplines. Their travels have triggered vast voluntary and also forced migrations of people. They have shaped rituals, economies, diets, and imaginations. Plant humanities wants to emphasize that plants are not the passive background of human and animal life, but rather active agents. Some of you might have read, for example, the work of Michael Pollan, who suggests that plants like sugarcane and coffee didn't just serve us, but rather that we evolved with them, and that our cravings for sweetness and stimulation and our economies of trade and extraction cannot really be explained without the mark of these huge botanical influences. Plant humanities is also a way of saying that different disciplines in the humanities need to be in conversations around plants. As I said, my background is in literary studies, but you also find contemporary philosophers who have been thinking about the question of the ontology of plants. What does it mean to consider plants as active agents? Plant humanities also draws from history of science, that is how plants have been used as medicine for millennia in different cultures. Art history, as Debora was saying, how, for example, Renaissance frescoes have represented plant life. Anthropology, to try to understand the different ways in which different cultures have used plants as forms of spiritual and physical nourishment. And landscape architecture, which is more and more concerned with questions of biodiversity preservation and habitat restoration. Plant humanities also emphasizes storytelling really as a method and as a lens. We speak of plant narratives, which are stories of mobility and meaning. These are tales of how plants are used for food and medicine, as I was saying before, but also stories of aesthetics, of adventure, of loss. They include histories of colonialism, commerce, but also histories of beauty and extinction. And these stories are interdisciplinary by nature, and to tell them we need to bridge science, art, politics, and memory. Debora's plant series, as she was just showing, I would argue, is in itself a form of interdisciplinary plant narrative, as she works with historical, artistic, and scientific sources to train AI models. There are no humans in some of these images, no seasonal cues or geographic markers highlighting plant agency. And still, the plants, as Debora was explaining, carry the human trace. They echo the colonial histories of the Americas, where the logic of the plantation first took root, erasing indigenous knowledge of the land and flattening biocultural diversity. Debora's work, in a way, I think, counters this logic of the plantation through attention at form. And by foregrounding plants as resilient, as mobile, and historically charged, we're invited to see them not only as scientific specimens, but as living archives. The idea of plants as living archives can be quite powerful, I think, because it resists extractive ways of seeing them and instead offers a quiet but radical act of attention, and one that might push us to imagine other ways of living with the vegetable world. This intent to, in a way, imagine other ways of living. Oh, we can move to the next slide. Okay. Thank you. So you can see, I think, really reflects on some of the projects that I had been working on before meeting Debora, and one of the reasons why we connected so quickly. As you can see on the screen, some of these projects are digital, some of them are not. This is a website that I helped co-design with Dumbarton Oaks Plant Humanities Initiative and JSTOR Labs, which is a nonprofit that develops technological tools for education. As you can see, what the Plant Humanities Lab is trying to do is tell stories that are focused on distinctive plant species or families. And to do so, we really drew from a large pool of contributors, including, for example, Ashley Buchanan, who wrote this piece on Dittany. Ashley Buchanan is a historian of science working at the University of Florida. We also seek to integrate different media, which is something that also resonates with Debora's work. We are using mapping, open source mapping techniques, image annotation, networks, and really everything we can to try to reflect these stories of mobility around plants. A project that came out of this initiative was also the Plant of the Month series that is published by JSTOR Daily. And these are some of the pieces that I wrote. One of yerba mate, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. Caffeinated drink that is widely consumed in South America, especially in Argentina and the south of Brazil. I also wrote a piece on guarana. We ran a long series on caffeinated plants and plants that have really traveled across different geographies with different meanings. Think of how mate or guarana are consumed in the countries where they're native to and how they're consumed here very differently. Another project in which I worked with a group of scientists was around the work of Alexander Humboldt. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alexander Humboldt. I could speak about him for hours because I wrote part of my dissertation about him. So I won't. It's a good thing that you know about him. So you might be familiar then also with his tableau physique, which was this early 19th century representation that he created after climbing the Chimborazo mountain in Ecuador. The goal of which was to recreate the flora of the Andes and also to try to reflect how plants are really interconnected with every other climate phenomena, which is the idea that really made Humboldt a pioneer and the inspiration for Darwin and so many others. So in 2012, a group of scientists from different parts of the world recreated this trip. They climbed the Chimborazo again, and what they found was that all the different plant species that Humboldt had recorded were moving upwards at a very accelerated rate because of climate change, because of species were really trying to escape heat and moving upwards. and some of them were even disappearing. So again, this was a digital project where we were trying to bring to life this extinction process. But not all of the plant humanities projects that I've been involved with are digital. Between 2022 and 2024, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Jessica B. Harris, the curator of the African American Garden at the York Botanical Garden. If you were able to visit this exhibit, you might know that what we did was during 3 years, we presented a different garden with a different theme. The first year, the theme was Resilient and Remembrance, and it highlighted the contributions of African Americans to agriculture and horticulture in the US. In 2023, the theme was the Caribbean experience, expanding through other geographies. And in 2024, I had the opportunity to work closely with Dr. Harris and our team of horticulturists at NYBG to create the Diaspora Garden, which was really bringing together all the geographies in the Americas where the African diaspora had an impact through the lens of plants. So what you can see there is the sketches that we had, including a sort of sugarcane field in the first slide. I talked briefly about that one. As you can see, it's the only one that has a path across it, because what we were trying to recreate was the experience of being surrounded by cane. We often think of sugar as maybe potentially dangerous for health, but we don't really think about it as a plant, and we don't really think about how hostile it is as a plant. If you've seen sugarcane grow, it can be really tall, really thick, and really sharp. So we were trying to recreate a sensorial experience as well.
Okay, so here this is my Plantalia animation. It is done using the species that are registered in the archive. It's done digitally without using AI, because the aesthetical result that I wanted was something very specific, and it was not possible to do it with AI, so I did it digitally myself. And you see these plants appear suspended in a perpetual state of transformation. I like this to show it this way, because sometimes we perceive plants as rather static, but they are not. And also the composition there are kind of complex compositions. When we eliminate parts of it, it may not work anymore aesthetically, and it alludes to the delicate equilibrium of ecosystems. When you're going to touch a part of it, it may interfere with it all and generate cascading effects. And this is always a working in progress video, because when I add a new species to the archive, I redo the animation to accommodate the new species. And the archive is an ongoing archive. But back to the question, why do I use AI? Because I told you how do I use AI, but now I want to talk to you about why do I use AI. This is a question that comes often to me, because people know I'm originally a painter. And so there are many reasons for that. It is certainly not to speed up the process, because the process became even slower. And because why it is slower? Because I have to work with data sets. The data sets included thousands of elements, images. I have to classify the information, parameterize the information, and then I have to train the model, test the model. It's never perfect the first time, so I have to redo this process many times until I get familiarized with the model and learn how to work with, how to make it work for me. So it's a long process. But the reasons I do that are many. One is that the model virtually could generate an infinite quantity of outcomes, and all these outcomes refer to multiple references that belong to my practices. Also, there is a certain unpredictability in the outcomes, and I'm really fascinated by that. Any artistic process has unpredictability inside it, but here it is even more pronounced. And one of the unpredictabilities that happen in the process is the presence, as I showed before these images, is the presence of birds. These birds that you see in these images, they appear algorithmically, unexpectedly, unsolicited, and I decide to accommodate them. Not only I accept them, but they become part of most of my images. And while I was working with this with plant, I read also a book by Matthew Battles, in which he talks about nature that exists beyond our desire of control and classification. He calls it ferality, nature that we cannot control. We have this desire to control everything, but it's not like that with nature. And so I decided to give more importance to the birds, and I extract the birds that you see in the compositions. I extract some of them, I recreate them digitally, and I animate them, like you can see here. And when I present them at a human scale. So it's a direct dialogue. It's, there's no barrier. You don't see the bird as a tiny entity up in the sky, but it's right there talking to you. And the first time I show it, it was in a project commissioned by American Express during the Design Week in Milan. And so we had these monitors inserted in a real garden. And it was very interesting to see the relationship that people established with the artwork and with those birds. Actually, the distance between species really collapsed, and they start seeing those birds as something different. I also like them because they reject the ideals of purity. They bring an improvisational vitality to the work. They are feral. Ferality embodies life, as I was saying, beyond man domination and categorization. It symbolizes a form of coexistence that is unpredictable and indeterminate. I'm going to show you just one more artwork. This is herbaria. I collect materials from herbariums, and I paint them digitally in order to recreate the missing parts of it. It's a practice that was done in the past when they were creating herbariums. Part of it was actual organic materials, and part were illustrations. I like that some herbariums were done like that, and the idea came also from that. And also came from a conversation I had with a botanist in Rome, in which he was, for 4 hours, explaining to me many projects that he was involved with the objective of bringing back to life species that went extinct in the wild. And he was talking to me about the difficulties and complexities and about it. So I decided to create this animation here where I bring these species back to life from herbarium. They make them live, flicker for just a few seconds, and then they will vanish again as they are going back to the cabinets. And when plants become extinct, it's not just the genetic code that is lost. Sometimes we can get the genetic code, but even with the genetic code, it's difficult to bring them back to life in nature. Probably the cause of extinction is still there. The ecosystems have changed so much, so it's a long process. And it's very well known, these difficulties here in the United States with the American chestnut, the Castanea dentata, that was a species that involved many researchers and volunteers, and it's always also a long-term process, because even if technology goes fast, you have to follow the time of the plant. You know, when you create a hybrid that is as close as possible, similar to the American chestnut, but it resists the fungi that is in the whole United States, you have then to plant and to see how the plant is going to evolve and regenerate. So it's always a long process that usually takes more than a human lifetime. The following researchers will keep going with that project. And so I was saying that it's not only the genetic, it's not just a loss in the genetic code, but the entire symphony of relationships of those plants will be missing. Plants are carriers of meaning, and it's so interesting when you started to see the details of plant life. You see that it intertwines with culture, with history, and with science. And in my work, I would like to make people see plants with more reverence. I think that's missing a lot in today's society, because plants are normally seen as resources to be exploited. And plants actually invite humans to connections and rather than consumption. So maybe you want to say something?
Yes. So again, as Debora was talking right now about unpredictability, I was reminded of this story of how herbaria were born originally in the early modern period in Europe as a response to that unpredictability, right? So something that I feel really compelled by in Debora's work is how this element of formal methodological unpredictability that comes with the use of digital art and AI is in a way mirroring the unpredictability of plants, the very same thing that makes us wonder whether projects like restoring the American chestnut to life will work or not. It makes us think about a different scale. It makes us rethink what our temporality is, makes us rethink how we can connect, as Debora was saying, with different species that might have other needs, and might operate at different timescales. So we started with a story from the herbarium. I would like to end with another story that comes from an herbarium, but unlike the first one, this is rather a story of hope, and one that speaks to both Debora's herbaria and to plant humanities, I think, as a field, and some of the concerns that scholars in the plant humanities are trying to address. So in 2023, a group of scientists from Roma Tre University in Italy discovered that several extinct plants might still have a chance at life. While surveying thousands of digitized herbarium specimens from around the world, they realized that some of them, carefully preserved for decades or even centuries, still contain seeds. And they started thinking whether these seeds that had been collected in the field along with the plants could be viable to be germinated or not. Among them were a Hawaiian peperonia, a Roman buttercup, and so many others that as Debora said, are now extinct in the wild. As you can imagine, the challenge is huge, and it's unclear whether these seeds can be germinated or not, and how they would behave. Again, there's this element of unpredictability. The possibility is extraordinary, and these projects, as you might know, have not received the same kind of media attention that projects like resurrecting the direwolf or the mammoth or the dodo have gathered. And the approach is actually quite different, because when we think about the possibility of allegedly bringing back the direwolf to life, really what scientists are thinking about is genetic engineering and really creating a proxy of a species that will never come back to life. And yet with this technique that botanists are exploring, what we would have back is the actual species, not a proxy of the species, but the actual plant. And therefore, it could be the case that all the relationships around, all the ecosystem relationships around the plants could be restored as well. But again, perhaps because of plant awareness deficit, these efforts do not get the same attention. The scientific research, I think, it's in direct conversation with Debora's work. I think really work like Debora's can inspire both scientists and humanists. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in collaborating with her. If you think again of Plantalia, the video that Debora was just showing, it's a body of work that foregrounds the interconnectedness of life, that at which Humboldt was trying to get 200 years ago, insisting that plants are not isolated individuals. Nobody really is an isolated individual, but part of a complex entanglement that stretches across time, territory, and different species. It's again what Humboldt tried to teach us 2 centuries ago, and it's what the plant humanities continue to explore today. And it's why I'm personally interested in plant stories, in plant narratives, because they might help us reimagine their past, their agency, and their futures. I want to end with a quote from a philosopher called Michael Marder, who wrote a book, Plant Thinking, a few years ago now, that has become pretty influential in what some people call critical plant studies, what I'd rather call plant humanities. That's a boring conversation that we can have later. But the question that Marder asks is, I quote, "How is it possible for us to encounter plants? And how can we maintain and nurture otherness in the course of this encounter?" In other words, I believe this question, answering this question, is really the shared task of botany and art, which is how can we have a sense of what the vibrant world of plants looks like? How can we create windows for us to look at it and to radically imagine different forms of life, forms of non-human life that might lie beyond our thought and our imagination? That's the possibility that excites me so much about Debora's work, and that's why I look forward to working together in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just curious about the Guinean grass.
Yes.
The Caribbean, and it's maybe a little bit outside the specific topic, but